The bitter winter wind cut through Harper's threadbare coat as she hurried down the deserted streets after her double shift at Joe's diner. Her fingers, red and raw from washing dishes for 10 hours straight, clutched her meager tips, barely enough for tomorrow's bus fare, let alone the overdue rent that her landlord had been hounding her about all week. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across the snow-dusted sidewalk as she cut through the alley behind Franklin Avenue. Harper had walked this route countless times, but tonight felt different somehow. The silence more oppressive, the darkness deeper than usual. She nearly tripped over him, a crumpled form half hidden between a parked car and the brick wall of an abandoned storefront. At first glance, Harper thought it was just another pile of discarded clothes, until she noticed the expensive leather shoes and the slight rise and fall of breathing. If you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens next, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us as we continue bringing these stories to life. Dropping to her knees, Harper gently turned the boy over, gasping at his deathly pale complexion. He couldn't have been more than 14, dressed in clothes worth more than her entire wardrobe, a private school uniform beneath a cashmere coat that seemed wildly out of place in this neighborhood. "Hey, can you hear me?" she whispered, checking for injuries as her nursing school training kicked in. His pulse was weak but steady, no visible wounds, but his skin felt cold and clammy to the touch, symptoms she recognized all too well. As Harper rummaged through his pockets searching for identification or medication, her fingers closed around a sleek smartphone with a case that probably cost more than her weekly paycheck. The lock screen showed only one emergency contact. Dad. No name, just that single word that would change the course of her life forever. Her finger hovered over the button for just a moment before she pressed it, heart pounding as the call connected almost instantly. "Nicholas," came the response, a deep, accented voice that somehow managed to sound both concerned and threatening in that single word. This isn't Nicholas," Harper replied, her voice shakier than she'd intended. "My name is Harper, and I found a boy collapsed on Franklin Avenue near 23rd Street. I think this is his father's phone number." The silence that followed was so absolute that Harper thought the call had dropped, until she heard the faint sound of rapid breathing on the other end. "Is he breathing?" the man finally asked, his voice now hard as steel. All pretense of calm completely vanished. "Yes, but he's unconscious. I think it might be hypoglycemia. I'm a nursing student, and he's showing all the signs of a severe drop in blood sugar," Harper explained, automatically falling into the clinical tone she'd practiced in her hospital rotations. "Do not move him. Do not call anyone else." The man's voice had transformed into something that made Harper's blood run cold. "I'm 10 minutes away. Stay exactly where you are, and keep him warm." Exactly 8 minutes later, Harper heard the purr of an expensive engine as a black SUV with tinted windows glided to a stop at the curb. 3 men emerged in perfect synchronization, 2 taking positions on either side of the vehicle, while the third approached with purposeful strides. Even from a distance, Harper could feel the authority radiating from him, tall and imposing in a tailored overcoat that couldn't quite conceal the bulge of what she instinctively knew was a shoulder holster. His features were sharp and aristocratic, dark eyes scanning the street before settling on her with laser-like intensity. "Mr. Blackstone," the man introduced himself tersely as he knelt beside his son, his movements betraying none of the panic a normal parent would display. "You said hypoglycemia?" Harper nodded, watching as he produced a small kit from his coat pocket with practiced efficiency. "Nicholas has diabetes, type 1 since he was 8, he explained, administering an injection with the confidence of someone who had done this countless times before. Within moments, color began returning to the boy's face, his eyelids fluttering open to reveal eyes identical to his father's. "Dad?" he mumbled, clearly disoriented. "I forgot my emergency kit at school after basketball practice, and I thought I could make it home." Mr. Blackstone's expression softened almost imperceptibly as he helped his son to sit up. "We'll discuss your poor decision-making later," he said, though the relief in his voice undermined the attempted sternness of his words. As they helped Nicholas to his feet, Harper awkwardly began to step away, considering her good deed done. "Wait," Mr. Blackstone commanded without looking at her, the single word freezing her in place more effectively than a physical barrier. "Thank you for helping my son," he said, finally turning to face her fully, his penetrating gaze seeming to catalog every detail of her appearance, the worn uniform beneath her threadbare coat, the exhaustion etched into her features, the determination in her eyes despite it all. "Anyone would have done the same," Harper replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. Not in this neighborhood, not at this hour, not for a stranger who screamed wealth and vulnerability in equal measure. Mr. Blackstone reached into his pocket, and Harper instinctively stepped back, her pride bristling at the thought of being offered money. "I don't need a reward," she said quickly, chin lifting with the stubborn dignity that had carried her through years of poverty. "Not a reward," he corrected, extending a business card made of heavy stock paper with nothing but a phone number embossed in silver. "An opportunity. Call this number tomorrow morning. I have a proposition for someone with your medical knowledge and moral character." As the SUV disappeared into the night with Nicholas safely inside, Harper stood alone on the street corner, the expensive business card feeling impossibly heavy in her hand. Something told her that accepting his opportunity would irrevocably change the course of her life. She just couldn't decide if that change would be salvation or destruction. Harper spent the night tossing and turning, the business card on her nightstand seeming to glow in the darkness. When morning came, she dialed the number with trembling fingers, surprised when a crisp female voice answered immediately and instructed her to arrive at an address in the city's most affluent neighborhood in precisely 2 hours. The mansion that loomed before her made Harper's apartment building look like a dollhouse in comparison. Wrought iron gates parted silently as the security guard checked her ID, waving her through to a circular driveway where perfectly manicured hedges framed the limestone facade. Mr. Blackstone waited in what she assumed was his study, a room larger than her entire apartment, lined with leather-bound books and dominated by an antique desk that probably cost more than her student loans. "Miss Watson," he acknowledged, gesturing to a chair across from him. "Thank you for coming. Nicholas has a rare form of type 1 diabetes that makes his condition particularly volatile," he explained without preamble. "His previous medical companion recently left our employment, and I find myself in need of someone with your specific skills and discretion." Harper's jaw nearly dropped at the figure he named as her salary, more money than she'd make in 3 years at the diner. "You want me to be your son's... what exactly? Nurse? Babysitter?" she asked, struggling to maintain her composure. "Medical monitor," Mr. Blackstone corrected. "Nicholas is 14 and resents constant supervision, but his condition requires it. You would live here, accompany him to school events, monitor his glucose levels, and ensure he follows his treatment protocol." A door slammed somewhere in the house, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Moments later, Nicholas burst into the study, his earlier vulnerability completely transformed into teenage defiance. "I don't need a babysitter, Dad. I had 1 bad episode. 3 this month," his father countered with steel in his voice. "And last night could have been fatal if Miss Watson hadn't found you." "This isn't negotiable, Nicholas." The teenager glared at Harper as if she were personally responsible for his predicament. "So what? She follows me around school? My friends will think I'm under house arrest or something." "Your friends will think whatever I tell them to think, Mr. Blackstone replied coldly, revealing a glimpse of the power Harper suspected he wielded far beyond the walls of this mansion. "Miss Watson will pose as my personal assistant, who happens to be studying nursing. Nothing more suspicious than that." Nicholas stormed out, slamming the door with theatrical teenage rage. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room until Mr. Blackstone sighed, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his features so quickly, Harper almost missed it. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly, opening a desk drawer and removing a thick file. "Nicholas's mother was murdered 3 years ago, a business associate's attempt to strike at me. Since then, his condition has deteriorated significantly under the stress and trauma." Harper's nursing instincts kicked in immediately. Psychological stress can absolutely impact blood glucose regulation. Has he received proper counseling for the trauma? By the end of the week, Harper had moved into a suite of rooms in the east wing of the Blackstone mansion, her meager possessions looking laughably out of place among the luxury. The staff, a mixture of household employees and men who clearly served security purposes, regarded her with polite curiosity. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, took Harper under her wing, explaining the complex rhythms of the household while helping her unpack. "Mr. Blackstone may seem cold," she said quietly, folding Harper's uniforms with more care than they'd ever received, "but everything he does is to protect Nicholas." Harper's first week passed in a blur of adjustment and careful observation. Nicholas alternated between sullen resistance and grudging cooperation, his attitude softening slightly when Harper helped him manage a glucose crash without alerting his father and the subsequent embarrassment. The mansion operated like a well-oiled machine, with staff moving through their duties with practiced precision. Harper quickly learned which rooms were open to her and which remained mysteriously locked, which staff members were actually security personnel, and most importantly, which nights Mr. Blackstone hosted business meetings that she and Nicholas were expected to avoid entirely. One evening, while helping Nicholas with his biology homework in the kitchen, Harper overheard two security men speaking in hushed tones about a shipment coming through the harbor and complications with the Donovan family. Nicholas caught her listening and shook his head slightly, a warning she immediately understood. "You don't ask questions in this house," he told her later, as she checked his glucose levels before bed. "Dad has complicated business interests. The less you know, the safer you are." The next morning, Harper encountered Mr. Blackstone in the hallway, his knuckles bruised in a pattern she recognized from her ER rotations, the distinctive marks of someone who had recently been in a fight. Their eyes met, his challenging her to comment, hers showing only clinical assessment without judgment. "Nicholas has a school field trip today," she said instead, pretending not to notice. "I've packed his emergency kit and extra sensors for his continuous glucose monitor. We'll be back by 4. Mr. Blackstone nodded, visibly relaxing at her discretion. "Take Ramirez with you," he instructed, referring to one of his security men. Standard protocol for outings. What had started as a job was rapidly becoming a complex dance of unspoken rules and careful boundaries. Harper found herself drawn into the strange intimacy of the Blackstone household, where danger and luxury coexisted in an uneasy balance. The first real threat came 6 weeks into Harper's employment, on an unseasonably warm spring afternoon. She and Nicholas were returning from his endocrinologist appointment when she noticed a black sedan following their car, maintaining a precise distance through 3 consecutive turns. "Nicholas," she said quietly, careful to keep her voice casual, "text your father's security team. We have a tail, 3 car lengths back, black Audi, tinted windows." The teenager's eyes widened momentarily before his face settled into an eerily adult calm. "This isn't the first time," he muttered, fingers flying across his phone screen. "Dad has rivals who like to remind him they know his patterns." Within minutes, 2 unmarked SUVs materialized, seamlessly inserting themselves between Harper's car and the sedan. By the time they reached the mansion gates, their unwelcome shadow had vanished. But the incident left Harper with a lingering sense of unease. That evening, she was summoned to Mr. Blackstone's study, where he sat reviewing security footage with an expression that made her blood run cold. "You noticed the tail immediately," he observed, rewinding the street camera footage to show her precise moment of recognition. "Most people wouldn't have. My neighborhood wasn't exactly safe," Harper replied with a shrug. "You develop certain instincts when you walk home alone at night for years." Mr. Blackstone studied her with new interest, as if reassessing a puzzle whose pieces had suddenly shifted. "The Donovan family is hosting a charity gala next weekend," he said abruptly. "I'll be attending, and I want you and Nicholas to accompany me." "The Donovans?" Harper echoed, recognizing the name from the whispered conversation she'd overheard weeks ago. "Aren't they your business rivals?" A dangerous smile flickered across his face. "Officially, we're friendly competitors in the import business. Unofficially, Michael Donovan has been trying to discover Nicholas's medical condition for months, believing it to be a potential weakness in my organizational structure." Harper felt the full weight of what she'd stepped into. This wasn't just about a boy with diabetes, but about power dynamics she barely comprehended. "You want to use me as a shield," she realized aloud. "Having Nicholas's medical companion nearby shows you're addressing the vulnerability while flaunting that you're not hiding it. Instead of denying it, Mr. Blackstone nodded approvingly. "You understand the language of power better than I expected, Miss Watson." 3 days later, a delivery arrived for Harper, a gown in deep emerald silk that probably cost more than a semester's tuition, with a note in Mr. Blackstone's precise handwriting. "For the gala, the Donovans will be watching everything, including appearances." The Donovan family estate rivaled Blackstone's in grandeur, with crystal chandeliers illuminating a ballroom filled with Chicago's elite. Harper felt painfully out of place despite her elegant gown, hyper-aware of the calculating gazes following her every move as she kept Nicholas within sight. Michael Donovan approached them during dinner, a smile that never reached his eyes fixed on his face, as he greeted Mr. Blackstone with the false warmth of a longtime enemy. "And who is this lovely young woman?" he inquired, his gaze lingering on Harper with uncomfortable intensity. "Harper Watson, my personal assistant," Mr. Blackstone replied smoothly, his hand coming to rest protectively at the small of her back. She's pursuing her nursing degree while helping manage my household affairs. The evening progressed with the careful choreography of predators circling each other, every conversation layered with double meanings that Harper only partially grasped. Nicholas remained unusually subdued, sticking close to her side and checking his glucose monitor more frequently than normal under the stress. As the orchestra began playing after dinner, Harper noticed Nicholas's hands trembling slightly, an early warning sign she had learned to recognize. A quick check of his monitor confirmed her suspicions. His glucose levels were dropping dangerously fast. "Nicholas needs air," she murmured to Mr. Blackstone, keeping her voice light, even as she slipped his emergency kit from her clutch purse. "We'll step onto the terrace for a moment." They had barely made it outside when Nicholas's legs buckled beneath him, his skin going clammy as the severe hypoglycemia took hold. Harper worked quickly, administering glucose gel inside his cheek, while keeping his airway clear. Mr. Blackstone appeared beside them, his composed facade cracking slightly, as he knelt next to his son. "What happened?" he demanded, the fear in his voice making him sound human for the first time since Harper had met him. "Stress-induced crash," Harper explained, continuing to monitor Nicholas's vitals as color slowly returned to his face. "His body's burning glucose faster than normal because of the adrenaline. He'll be okay in a few minutes." As Nicholas began to recover, Harper became aware of a shadow lingering near the terrace doors. Michael Donovan, watching with undisguised interest before disappearing back into the ballroom. "He saw everything," she whispered, sudden dread pooling in her stomach. "Get Nicholas to the car," Mr. Blackstone ordered, his expression hardening into something dangerous as he stood. "I need to have a word with our host before we leave." The ride home passed in tense silence, Nicholas sleeping in the back seat, while Mr. Blackstone made a series of cryptic phone calls. When they arrived at the mansion, he carried his son inside with surprising gentleness before returning to where Harper waited in the foyer. "Donovan will use what he saw tonight," Mr. Blackstone stated flatly, pacing the length of his study as Harper sat exhausted in the leather chair. "He'll spread word of Nicholas's condition, position it as a weakness in my organization, attempt to leverage it against me." Harper watched him move like a caged predator, seeing for the first time the full weight he carried. "You've spent years hiding his condition, haven't you? Not just for his privacy, but because in your world, any vulnerability can be exploited." "My wife was killed because she was perceived as my weakness," he replied, voice hollow, with a grief that still felt raw after 3 years. "I won't let that happen to my son." Dawn was breaking when Mr. Blackstone's security chief burst into the study without knocking, a breach of protocol that instantly put Harper on alert. "Sir, we have confirmation that Donovan's men accessed Miss Watson's apartment building last night. They've been questioning her former neighbors." Cold dread washed over Harper as she realized the implications. "They're investigating me? Why would they care about my background?" "Because you're now connected to me," Mr. Blackstone explained grimly. "And Donovan will use anyone in my orbit as potential leverage. Your former life, your remaining connections there, they're all vulnerable points now." The weight of responsibility pressed down on Harper's shoulders as she realized her decision affected more than just herself. Images of Mrs. Patel watering her window plants and offering Harper homemade chai flashed through her mind, suddenly transformed into potential targets in a war she never chose to join. James's network of informants had already intercepted 3 of Donovan's men surveilling the community college where Harper's study partners still gathered every Thursday. The thought of violence touching that small library room where she'd once struggled through anatomy flashcards turned her stomach to ice. "They won't stop at passive observation," James warned, sliding surveillance photos across his desk. "Donovan believes in applying pressure until something breaks. He'll start with subtle intimidation and escalate until he finds the threshold of what you can bear." Harper examined the clinical rotation schedule that Professor Jenkins had presented, each location carefully selected not just for educational value but for security infrastructure. Even her education had become a strategic consideration in a chess game where she was simultaneously pawn and queen. Harper thought of her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patel, who had always saved leftovers for her, of her study group at the community college, of the diner owner who had kept her job open despite her sudden departure. "These are innocent people who have nothing to do with your world." Mr. Blackstone's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or something deeper. "There are 2 options now. You can leave, return to your life with enough money to finish your degree somewhere far from Chicago. Or you can stay, and I'll extend my protection to those you care about." "That's not really a choice," Harper said quietly. understanding the manipulation even as she recognized the genuine offer of protection. "You know I won't abandon Nicholas now." The next morning, a sleek black car arrived carrying Harper's nursing school advisor, Professor Jenkins, who looked bewildered to be escorted into Blackstone's study. "Miss Watson, your benefactor has made an unusual request regarding your education," she began, glancing nervously at Mr. Blackstone. The unusual request turned out to be a complete restructuring of Harper's degree program, private tutoring, accelerated coursework, and clinical rotations arranged at medical facilities owned by Blackstone subsidiaries. Professor Jenkins left with a dazed expression and a substantial donation check for the nursing program. "You're rewriting my life," Harper observed that evening, as they sat on Nicholas's hospital-grade monitoring equipment, "making me dependent on your world, cutting off my escape routes." 3 months after the Donovan Gala, Harper's integration into the Blackstone household was nearly complete. Nicholas had transformed from a reluctant patient to an ally, his health stabilizing under her consistent care, while their relationship evolved into something like friendship, or even siblings. The morning calm shattered when Harper entered the kitchen to find Mr. Blackstone, James, as he'd finally insisted she call him, speaking tersely into his phone, his knuckles white around the receiver. "Bring the car around. We need to move now." "Donovan's men took Mrs. Patel," he explained grimly as they rushed toward the waiting vehicle. "Your former neighbor. They're holding her at an abandoned warehouse as bait, expecting me to send security while they target Nicholas here." Harper's blood ran cold at the thought of the kind elderly woman in the hands of men like Donovan. "We have to help her. She has nothing to do with any of this. She's innocent." James's expression was unreadable as he checked his weapon. "That's why we're going personally while the security team stays with Nicholas. They expect me to prioritize my household over your connection. It's the one scenario they haven't planned for." The warehouse loomed ahead, deceptively quiet in the morning light. James handed Harper a small device. "Tracking beacon. If anything happens to me, press this button and my team will come. Get Mrs. Patel out first, no matter what." Inside was a maze of shipping containers and forgotten machinery, the air thick with dust and foreboding. James moved with predatory grace, signaling Harper to follow his exact footsteps as they navigated deeper into the trap that waited for them. They found Mrs. Patel tied to a chair in a small office, frightened but mercifully unharmed. As Harper rushed to untie her, James positioned himself at the doorway, weapon raised against the footsteps approaching from multiple directions. "Get her to the exit," he ordered, eyes never leaving the corridor. "I'll hold them off. Don't argue, Harper. Her life depends on your speed now." Supporting Mrs. Patel's weight, Harper hurried through the warren of corridors, the sounds of gunfire erupting behind them. They had almost reached the exit when a figure stepped from the shadows. Michael Donovan himself, a pistol aimed directly at them. Time seemed to slow as Harper positioned herself between the gun and Mrs. Patel, her medical training automatically calculating angles and vital points. The warehouse's damp air filled her lungs as she breathed deeply, searching for the same calm she'd mastered during Nicholas's worst episodes. Donovan's eyes betrayed a flash of uncertainty. He had expected fear or pleading, not the steady gaze of someone who had already accepted the possibility of this moment, from the day she first called James Blackstone. The power dynamic shifted imperceptibly as Harper held her ground without flinching. Behind Donovan's shoulder, a shadow detached from the darkness, moving with liquid precision that spoke of years of combat training. James's presence radiated a controlled fury that seemed to lower the temperature in the warehouse. His focus narrowed to a predatory intensity Harper had glimpsed only once before, the night Nicholas had collapsed at the gala. The moment crystallized Harper's transformation, from a struggling nursing student who once feared the implications of Blackstone's world, to a woman who now understood its unspoken language of power and protection. The warehouse's decaying walls held witness to the final dissolution of her old life and the solidification of her place in this new one. "The famous nurse," he sneered, blocking their path. "Blackstone's new weakness. How convenient that you've delivered yourself to me, saving me the trouble of hunting you down later." In that moment of terror, Harper made a calculation based on everything she'd learned in the Blackstone household. "You won't shoot me," she stated with more confidence than she felt. "I'm more valuable as leverage. And you won't shoot an elderly woman because even in your world, there are lines you don't cross." Donovan's momentary hesitation was all that was needed. James appeared behind him, silent as a ghost, the barrel of his gun pressing against Donovan's skull. "You targeted my son's medical condition. You abducted an innocent woman. You threatened someone under my protection," he said, his voice eerily calm. Any one of these would earn my retribution. All three? That's a death sentence. The drive back to the mansion passed in stunned silence. Mrs. Patel safely delivered to a private medical facility with round-the-clock security. It wasn't until they were alone in his study that Harper finally asked the question that had been burning inside her since the warehouse. "You could have let them take me," she said quietly. "It would have been the logical choice. Protect Nicholas. Sacrifice the nurse. Why risk everything to save me and Mrs. Patel?" James moved toward her slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. "Because you showed me there's more to strength than power," he answered, his voice rough with emotion. "The night you found my son, you stopped for a stranger when no one else would. That kind of courage, it's worth protecting." The distance between them vanished as his hand cupped her cheek, thumb tracing the outline of her jaw. "Stay," he whispered, the word somewhere between a command and a plea. "Not as Nicholas's nurse, not as my employee. Stay because this house hasn't felt like a home until you were in it. Thank you for following my story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is crucial for me to continue creating content here.